So welcome dear students once again to my online tutorial. Today's class is for the first semester FYGP students. Their paper is of course English, Literary and Social History. Here today I am discussing what is called the metaphysical poetry. So that is one of the developments of the 17th century. We need to discuss it in detail. Now the term metaphysical poetry, first of all. Now the term metaphysical is the adjective of metaphysics. Now metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. So what has it got to do with poetry? Now metaphysics deals with big questions, fundamental questions like questions on being, knowing, time and space. These are the big questions of philosophy. Now what has those questions to do with poetry? Now that term metaphysical of course was first used by Dr. Johnson with regard to a particular group of poets, but before that in 1693 John Dryden in his discourse concerning satire, while talking about Donne, he said that Donne affects the metaphysics. So what is that word affects? So affects can mean adopt. So Donne here adopts the style and procedure and imagery of the metaphysical philosophers. What did he find metaphysical there, Dryden? He found in the poetry of Donne reasoning, use of a lot of wit, lot of learning on a variety of subjects, argumentative method, and startling parallels. These are some of the procedures used by the metaphysical philosophers. Dryden found those in Donne's manner of poetry. So he said Donne adopts the metaphysics, Donne affects the metaphysics. Later in 1779, in his Life of Cowley, Dr. Johnson considered this group of poets led by John Donne, then George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, Andrew Marvell and Henry Vaughan. This group of poets he called, of the 17th century, he called metaphysicals. They are the metaphysical poets. Of course, obvious, the term came only posthumously. This group of poets was called metaphysical poets later on, posthumously, not during their lifetime. Now what did Johnson find metaphysical in this poetry? He found that in this kind of poetry, Donne and the others, what they did was they startled the reader, shocked the reader by using startling parallels. He said, his exact words were, in their poetry, heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. Heterogeneous ideas, very dissimilar ideas, ideas and objects from different worlds, different realms, put together as if violently. That is what is metaphysical. That is what is very startling about this group of poets. Now that startling parallels actually is the primary quality of the metaphysical poets. These are called metaphysical conceits. Now conceits we know are comparisons between dissimilar things. Now Petrarchan conceits were there before that. The Petrarchan conceits were used in his love poems to describe the pains and agonies of the lover. But those had become by the 17th century very hackneyed, routine and dull. Then came these poets in the early 17th century who used certain very shocking parallels. Abundantly extreme cases are there. Like in Donne's poem Valediction Forbidding Mourning, he compares the two lovers to the 2 feet of a compass. Now you see, it's very, very different from saying that love is like a red rose. The 2 lovers are compared to the feet of a compass. So they are bringing they're learning from all subjects, from the new Renaissance explorations, Renaissance discoveries, inventions, everything they bring into their poetry. That is what is metaphysical. So use of metaphysical concepts. Then of course startling parallels we said. Then other characteristics of metaphysical poetry are they use the actual speech, colloquial language. Then an abundance of wit, as we have already said, very clever arguments they use, reasoning. Now if you read the poem by Andrew Marvell, to his coy mistress, you see how he uses the argumentative procedure, intellectuality, logic to convince the mistress to seize and enjoy the day. Now an abundant use of pun, clever logic, paradox and irony. Now these are usually not the stuff of poetry, stuff of love poetry or religious poetry. But the metaphysical poets use these devices, these techniques in their love poetry as well as religious poetry. Plus, they use certain other shock tactics as well. In addition to the use of metaphysical concept, these shock tactics are direct address, dramatic quality, and abrupt openings. Like the best example, of course, maybe it's the poem "The Sunny Rising" by John Donne, where he addresses the sun directly, who intervenes in the love of the lovers. He directly addresses the sun, busy, old, full, unruly sun. So that is the kind of poetry that we have in the name of metaphysical poetry. So this kind of poetry was called metaphysical poetry. Origin, of course, in the labeling by Johnson, which has its source, of course, we can say in Dryden, 1693, but posthumous label. Then this is the group of poets: Donne, Herbert, Crashaw, Marvell, Vaughan, and their characteristics, we said, are reasoning, wit, learning, obscure reasoning, argumentative, very intellectual, very learned. Then startling parallels, actual speech, clever logic, paradox, irony. These are the characters. Then shock tactics like direct address, dramatic quality, and abrupt openings. Of course, the most importantly is the startling parallels between dissimilar things called metaphysical conceits. Now, this kind of poetry did not have much of a popularity in the 18th and 19th centuries. We know these terms are derogatory. When Dr. Johnson or Dryden used these terms, they were not praising those poets. They were actually saying that this is not the kind of language or procedure or imagery used in poetry. This is something different. Now then, of course, later on in the 20th century, these metaphysical poets gained much popularity. Their popularity was revived thanks to T.S. Eliot, who in his essay "The Metaphysical Poets," he actually talked about in his essay about the metaphysical poets, he talked about the unification of sensibility. He said that it is in these poets that we find the blending, the hybridity, the blending of the unification of thought and feeling. So in the 20th century, that is the revival of metaphysical poetry, and that was a very brief explanation of what metaphysical poetry is, the labeling, the characteristics, the deviations from traditional poetry. And yeah, I hope this particular session will help you in understanding this particular topic, the metaphysical poets of the 17th century. So thank you. Hope to meet you again in some other class. Thank you once again.